Hello,
Hi,
everyone. Welcome to the Armenian Music Project. I have an Armenian guitarist. I believe she's in New York now. Gohar Vardanyan, welcome.
thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So you're in New York now. You live
I'm in
there.
New York City. Yes, I've been living here since on and off since 1998.
Wow. I actually, 1998 is the year when my family moved to the US from Armenia. Uh,
Yeah, we came in 1997 to LA to
okay.
Glendale because all the Armenians are in Glendale.
Uh-huh.
Lived there for about a year and then moved to New York because of school. I went to the pre-college for Juilliard. So
Oh, wow. Okay. So why the move to from Armenia to LA? I mean, I'm sure it's for a better life, probably, but also, is there musical connection from the beginning or?
it was all musical connection. My
Okay.
dad was my first guitar teacher,
Uh-huh.
and he really wanted me to be a guitarist. It was just like it was his dream. Whatever kid he had, he was gonna make him into a guitarist or her. So initially in Armenia, this was when everything was falling apart, right? Like you would remember, we're probably the same age
Mhm.
um, after the Soviet Union collapsed. So the situation wasn't really for musicians to thrive. And since my parents wanted me to continue this guitar thing that I've been playing since I was five, we auditioned for the Juilliard pre-college division. And I got in, and the only thing left was to do an in-person audition because they can't really accept you on a video audition. It was back then at least. And when everything was working out, we just moved to LA for a year because this was a completely new country, and we didn't know anyone in New York. So we went to LA first because we had some family friends there to kind of get our feet on the ground to realize how this country works, and then lived there for I guess some 9 months or so. And once the school year started, moved to New York so I could start my studies. So it was definitely all for guitar.
Wow, that's amazing. It's, being a parent now, I understand some of these things a little bit more, but it's such a big sacrifice in some ways for parents to be like, we're doing this for our daughter to have a
Yeah.
better future or career. That's amazing. So your dad, do you guys play together? Does he play? Do you
No,
have?
he doesn't play anymore because he had a playing injury that
Oh,
had
wow.
developed.
Okay.
Actually, I have never heard him play before because back then they didn't have really like recordings. This is
Uh,
like 70s, right? So I think it was partially his dream for me to become a guitarist because he couldn't really do it anymore. He became a very good teacher because
oh,
of the injury. He became very good at teaching technique because he was
mm.
trying to figure out where he went wrong. So I never heard him play, and he still kind of tells me how to play, but but we never played together.
Wow. You have a couple of albums and you have a recent album. Tell me a little bit about the recent album and what it took to put together and why the repertoire that you picked for the album.
The most recent one, I love the music of Bach.
Mhm.
But performing Bach is really high maintenance. The musicians out there would know that it's just mentally exhausting to memorize Bach and perform, and when you're traveling and everything. So I never really play Bach on stage because even though I did that when you're at school, it's required. You learn, you perform, but it's such a safe environment when you're in school and you're doing that. When you're touring, you have to play jet lag sometimes. So I never risked performing it on stage. But I always loved it. So I decided, okay, next CD that I record, I will put Bach on it.
Mhm.
So it kind of started with that. But then, of course, I didn't want to do an entire CD of Bach. And some of the other pieces, I wanted to retire them out of my program because I played them for a number of years. And as much as I only play music that I really love, you still get sick of it after a while. So I decided to record so I can have some kind of an archive of the pieces. Like, okay, I did this at this time of my life. I recorded it. So that's how the repertoire came around. It was pieces I already played and pieces I wanted to play, but never really had the courage to put in my program.
Oh, wow. What's an artist, a composer from the past that's no longer alive, no longer around, that you wish was around now? You could ask them to compose something for you, or an artist that's no longer alive. You're like, I wish that violinist or that, other guitar player was around. I could have a duet with them or something. Some of those past artists.
I can't think of a past artist, but composer for guitar, I guess. Well, non-guitar would be Rachmaninoff.
Okay.
I think it would be amazing if he could write something for the guitar, right? Because I'm fascinated with his like piano music and everything, but transcribe that on a guitar, it's unplayable. It just doesn't sound the same. So it would be amazing to have Rachmaninoff write for the guitar, um, and to pick his brain, how to like how he did what he did. And Bach wrote for lute, so maybe like if he had the guitar, it's very similar. It would be nice to pick for guitars composers. Joaquin Rodrigo is one of my favorites, even though he wrote for the guitar, commissioned like right for the guitar. Even he wrote on the piano, though he wasn't a guitarist. So out of that, I would like to meet him. But he, again, we said past people who passed away. So
Yeah.
this is
Anyone that's since this is an Armenian show, any Armenian musicians that are currently performing, composing that you would want to collaborate with?
To be honest, I have been so removed from the Armenian community that I'm not very much in touch. Like I mean, I can recognize it's an Armenian name, but the guitar, it's so like we don't really play that much Armenian music. So I've been removed from it, and I don't really think about it too
Uh-huh.
much to
Uh-huh.
specifically think of an Armenian composer or Armenian musician. I always get asked that question, and I've done a very terrible job at keeping up.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. But one thing I love about what you do and everything that you've done musically, of course, that's fantastic. But you're never shy from representing Armenians. Now we see that in your bio, and it always puts a smile on my face because even though maybe you're not playing much, but you're still you're saying you're Armenian
Well,
musician.
I mean, like I know sometimes Armenians change their last name. I'm like, why are you changing your last name? I am Armenian. I was born in Yerevan. I lived there until I was 13. There's nothing I can do about it. Not that I would like to do anything about it. I'm proud to be one. I speak the language, even though I'm very terrible at reading and writing it, because that was left in sixth grade. It's just that by circumstance, after living in Glendale and moving to New York, I was always surrounded by either Americans or just anyone from anywhere in the world, but I was usually the only Armenian, where I always found myself explaining where Armenia is because most people didn't even know. So, or having to explain how to pronounce my name and my last name. And I don't say like you said my name correctly. It was so nice to hear Gohar Vardanyan and not like Gohar Vardanyan. But I make it easy to pronounce because once they see Vartanyan with a Y and it gets confusing.
Yeah.
It's just by circumstance, I wasn't surrounded by Armenians. In undergrad, I had one Armenian friend. She was from Tehran, so
Uh-huh.
in Iranian Armenian, and we spoke Armenian. She taught me some Armenian words that I had totally forgotten. So I got some practice, but it's just by circumstance. I'm not surrounded um, by Armenians, so I just kind of I'm the only one usually.
Yeah. So you said something about transcribing, and I know that you've done some work arranging or transcribing, and I have guitar friends who play guitar, and I've conducted a couple of guitar concertos. Do you what are some of the recent transcriptions or arrangements that you've done for the guitar?
I didn't do like a full transcription of a piece that didn't exist for the guitar, mostly because it takes a lot of time.
Oh,
And if I go on a venture like that, I know that it's going to take a long time to actually like make it my own. What I've done is mix things. Like I would find a transcription that is close enough to what I want to do. So, for example, La Vida Breve by Manuel de Falla, that's most of the time people play it on two guitars. Of course, it's an orchestral work, but people play it with two guitars. And I found a transcription that worked on one guitar, but I ended up changing a few things about it just to make it more playable. Or I found things that in the original, a melody was in a certain octave, or it was more obvious that the melody was there, and the guitar version was like hidden somewhere in the middle. So I changed things around to make it to my taste, to what I think sounds better. But to really go from scratch, that would take so much time, and it already takes so much time practicing and learning repertoire, and I teach a lot, so time hasn't allowed me
yeah.
to start from scratch.
Changing gears a little bit, you live in
Yeah.
New York.
Mhm.
For those who have not been to New York or have been as a tourist and they don't know the hidden gems, what are some places that you really enjoy that you think that many people might not know about? Just little places or things that you enjoy doing in New York.
In terms of like just places to go,
Yeah, places
or
to go, places to visit, whether it's a museum, like a smaller museum that most people might not know, or something that you just enjoy doing in New York.
I'm mostly an outdoorsy kind of person.
Mhm.
I love the city. I'm a city girl, but I like being outside. So I like going to parts of Central Park that other people don't really go to,
Okay.
like the northern part of Central Park, where most tourists don't really make it that far. They'll go to the around 59th Street and Fifth Avenue. I'll go to the middle parts where you really kind of feel like you've left the city because you stop seeing the skyline, like because you're surrounded by trees and you can really get lost in it. So that's a nice part if you just go like really above 90th Street in Central Park. And then other places is I like desserts. So, I try to find little cute places to find something really tasty. Unfortunately, now the things that I thought were unique, everyone else knows about it. They found out about it because they were really good. And it's no longer unique to New York because they've opened places in Houston and DC and stuff. But my favorite bakery was Levan Bakery for cookies. They had these gigantic cookies. They were like this big and this thick. It was like the size of a scone. But now they're everywhere. And honestly, I haven't been out gone to discover new places since like the last 6 months.
Yeah, yeah,
But usually it's finding some kind of a cute dessert place that is not all touristy.
yeah. Well, for the past 6 months, since you mentioned it, I have to ask, what have you been up to the past 6 months? Obviously, probably a lot of practicing, and one thing that's been a little bit easier, I guess, for those who teach private lessons is actually the ability to do that. And it's still the technology is not great, but it still gives you the opportunity to do some work. What have you been up to the past 6?
We had the worst in the very beginning, right? So we kind of like started right at the top. So in April it was more isolating because all of a sudden everything closed down and it was like a quick adjustment period. I always taught online before, like half my students were in person and half my students were online. So that transition was pretty easy. I just had to ask the whoever was in person if they were interested in doing online. So that was pretty easy. And in terms of going outside, we had some pretty strict rules, but we were always allowed to go exercise and to go buy groceries. So we were allowed to do that as long as you're careful, you're staying away from people. So I found myself, I live in Queens, so not in Manhattan. It's a little bit less crowded. I found any excuse to go outside and breathe some fresh air because I think I would totally lose my mind if I was inside all the time. So I always went running or walking at least like an hour to be outside. And yeah, the rest of the time I taught. Honestly, the practice didn't really increase because I don't know. It's just, I guess, getting adjusted to the situation, watching the news a lot more for a period of time just to see like what's happening. I didn't find myself all of a sudden with extra time to practice, even though I did have extra time. I just didn't use it that way. Some positive, even though like concerts never happened again, I I found the opportunity to stop practicing the concert repertoire and to start learning new music because you find yourself doing is when you have a concert every 3 weeks, every month, or whatever, it doesn't allow you big enough chunk of time where you're not responsible anymore for your concert repertoire to learn something new. So you're learning something new and all of a sudden like the concert is 2 weeks away and you have to go back and practice concert rep. This, I'm like, okay, well, there are no concerts for like, I don't know, probably a year. So I started learning new repertoire, totally abandoned all of the old pieces that didn't need to be practiced anymore, and started learning a new Bach suite. I know it's going to take a long time, and some other pieces. So I'm using that time, any practice time that I get, for new repertoire. And that's been what I've been occupying myself with basically.
Wow.
And the other, when the weather got nice, is just getting some vitamin D in the sun.
Your former teacher, Sharon Lisbon, was on my podcast. I talked to her and we actually spoke a little bit about you, but off record. But a little bit about, since she's such a legendary figure in the world of guitar and music in general, some of the things you've learned from her and maybe some fun stories that you could share. I know there's probably some you can't share, but some that you can share.
Yes, there's some. Actually, no, I studied with her during my graduate school. So what I really loved about her is all of the teachers that I've had, they all had very different teaching styles. So for for her, what I really loved is that all of her students really ended up sounding like themselves. Sometimes, you start sounding like your teacher, right? Because like they're always telling you how to do it, and it's very similar to how they sound. I think she has a special gift of teaching so that you do your best and you don't actually sound like her when you play. Not that that's a bad thing, but you sound like yourself, which is important. You don't want to be somebody else's copy. And she has a way of allowing you to know that you're good enough to make your own decisions. And I felt like that it was important in grad school because after that you're just thrown into the real world and you have to trust what you're doing and believe that you can do it or that you're good enough. So I really appreciated that about her, that she was very strict, but she was strict meaning like she wouldn't let you, get away from with not practicing. But she was, to me, she was very, very nice. So, and it also just comes from my personality as well. So she would give you suggestions, you would do it. Let's say she suggested something you didn't like. If you could do it better in a way that you like and it still sounds good, she would totally allow you to do that. It's just that you have to prove that what you're doing sounds better than her suggestion. So I have like a lot of from her teaching experience, I learned how to teach, and she had very good ways of explaining something, some musical aspect, and she would take it out of musical context and use some kind of a metaphor, compare it to something else in the world to make you understand what she's meaning. So I think it's a good gift to have, like to be able to explain things,
Yeah.
and at the same time, like forcing the students to practice. Because if you showed up and you didn't practice, I don't think you want to show up to a lesson of Sharon Lisbon and not have practiced. um, so I don't really have funny stories. I think it's just because our relationship was we would have the lesson and then we would have a studio class. We didn't have like some kind of too much social interaction to have some stories come out of it. But other than that, like from the teaching perspective, it was a great time to study with her for grad school.
Yeah, since you've been so successful and having a career, also being very successful at getting into some of these prestigious music programs from prep at Juilliard to, yeah, I think you went to Peabody Conservatory, yeah, and then you went to Juilliard again for your master's, and you've been to Aspen. Advice to young guitarists or musicians trying to audition to some of these very tough programs that, you might get 100 guitarists apply and they only pick 3 or 4, what's the process? What do you do and how have you been successful at doing so?
Honestly, I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to how you play, and first, I mean, obviously, if you're going to audition for music anywhere, you have to really understand that you have to love what you do because it's not going to be an easy career and you're not going to make a lot of money, so you have to make sure that you love what you do and you do it because of that, because you're going to come across a lot of difficulties on the way. And then you have to be a good player. So you have to see what's around you, and nowadays the younger guitarists, they're getting better and better. It's incredible. Like the generation, like my teachers maybe were like one of the best ones from that time, right? But now you look around and everyone is technically amazing, and so you have to find the right repertoire, your abilities, like everything. You have to work the hardest you possibly can to sound good, not just to get into the school. You got into the school, you have to make sure you have a chance of surviving after school, because you can go to school, get a whole lot of loans, pay for the school, walk out of it not a very good player, and you're stuck. So I think for whoever wants to go to continuing in guitar or any instrument, really, it's make sure that you're a good player, practice really hard on your work on your craft, basically. Don't try to please other people. You have to play the repertoire that's required, but also repertoire that you're good at, to shine. And yeah, don't no, really love what you do. I say that because I've gone through a lot of difficulty to get where I am, and at any moment it could have totally crashed and burned,
Yeah.
making a career out of it. So, and I'm not that bad, so like someone who's already has some kind of ability to play, if I had to go through all the difficulty to be able to make a living out of it, you have to make sure you're at least at that level
Wow.
before you commit to it.
I know you've been set on this path from a very young age, especially inspired by your dad. But has there ever been a moment where you've said, "Oh, I could have also been, I don't know, a journalist or an athlete or something else"? Has there ever been other career paths in your mind?
Like an actual real one that was a chance, no. But I always wanted to be a doctor, a surgeon, specifically, I was always curious to see what's inside things. So I wanted to be, as a child, that was like my dream thing. Like maybe I'll be a doctor. But in reality, I think I never really had that luxury because when your family gives up everything to move from one country to another country for you to become a musician, I was around 13 years old when I moved here. You have to be pretty serious about what you're doing, because you have to decide like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And there is no room for changing it back and forth. Sure, like when I got into USC for guitar, but I could have gotten to USC and then changed my major and like become something else, right? But I didn't. I went to Peabody instead. But still, it was like music conservatory. I think once you're set on that path with the sacrifice that comes with it, you don't have that luxury as much anymore. At least I didn't feel like I had the choice. Like, you know what? I'm going to quit all this, everything that my parents gave up for me to play a guitar, and I'm just going to be a journalist or whatever. Even though it, maybe it would have worked. And the other thing is that I was kind of good at it, and it's nice when you're good at it. You can see that maybe you can do it, and you're already on it, so it's easier to just continue rather than starting from scratch somewhere else.
Yeah. I know you've probably been asked this a million times, but what's the guitar you play and how have you come to choosing that guitar? I mean, what does it take, the process? I know it for other instruments, but specifically for the guitar, what was
So
the process of getting there?
the reason this is a genre pre. It's a Canadian guitar. The maker is Canadian, from Quebec. The reason I picked this guitar, this is really vain, is because of that.
Wow, that's
It's so
pretty,
pretty.
yeah.
It's jokes aside though. I was at the Guitar Foundation of America, the convention one year, and I had another guitar that I played for 10 years, but I had already I was better than the guitar could give me. I had overgrown, that's the word, outgrown the instrument. And I wasn't specifically looking for an instrument there because, these things are expensive. But I realized like that my guitar is going to hold me back from being able to really compare to other people who had better instruments. And I was talking to my friend, and Jean, he walked into the room with the guitar with the back like this. And all I saw was this dark neck and this really beautiful grain. And I just saw it, and it was like, for lack of a better comparison, it was like if a pretty girl walks into a bar and all the boys start looking at her. That was me. I stopped talking to my friend and I started looking at this guitar walking across the room. And I just kind of made a mental note, like, oh my God, the guitar is so pretty. And later on, like, I actually had competed in that competition. I didn't pass into the next round, and I spoke to one of the judges. And in short, his comments were like, "We loved your playing and we hated your guitar." Very direct, which I much appreciated. And that's when I got a little more serious, like, okay, well, I know that my guitar isn't that great, so time to look. And I started playing. It's a convention, so there's a vendor's fair. I played so many guitars out of curiosity. And then I thought, let me go try that pretty one downstairs. And I played it, and when I realized that it sounded as good as it looked, and that first attraction, that's what attracted me to it. I'm like, okay, it has everything I'm looking for. I'm a loud player in terms of the way I play the guitar. So if guitars are a little wimpy, I'll overplay it all the time. So I've tried guitars where like they're great, but I have to always tame myself to play lighter on it so that I don't overdo it. And this one, and no matter how much I pushed, it was like, okay, you want some more? I'll give you some more. So I played it at that vendor's fair. It was too many people there, and we took it to a private room. I played it there, and I couldn't find anything that I didn't like about it. And that day, she did come home with me. Luckily, I had two guitars, and luckily I had another friend flying to New York. And he didn't have a guitar with him, so he took one of the guitars, and I took the other one. So both the guitars made it on the plane. But that's how I met Jean's guitar.
That's awesome. We know the genres you play, what pieces you play, but do you listen to other genres? Are there other genres that you listen to? Rock or pop or hip hop or anything that come to mind?
I listen to flamenco, which is
Okay.
also guitar. I really do like flamenco because when I was a kid, that's the first style that I actually learned to play was flamenco and classical at the same time. But then when I got older, it was all classical because you can't really do both. I listen to other genres if I'm running and I have Spotify or Pandora on in the background for just some rhythm for running just to keep me going. But if you ask me about artists or pieces, songs or tunes, right? Like I wouldn't really know. I'll recognize the song. I have no idea who the artist is because it's not music that I always gravitate towards listening to. It's just I'll put it on for background um, rhythm or sound. And honestly, I listen to music more for educational purposes. I feel like, and this might be different for other musicians, but I spend my entire day teaching or playing. So my ears are listening to music, note combinations the entire day. When I'm done, I don't want to listen to music anymore. I prefer either just like spoken word, whatever, TV, or just silence. Just because you've spent, like, let's say you taught 5 students that day, and then maybe you also practiced a couple hours, that's 7 hours of
Yeah.
notes, good notes, bad notes, doesn't matter. I don't really feel like listening to music anymore after that. I want nothing, silence. So and just naturally I gravitate more towards classical music or flamenco, not really rock or pop. Nothing like that I would choose to listen to. But there might be a song that I might like and be like, oh, I know that song. I like that song. I just don't know what it's called and who wrote it. So
Any experimenting with electric guitar?
I've held it in my hands and I've plucked a couple notes on it. There's a video, I put it on Facebook, a video of me playing on an electric, I don't know, it was a solid body electric plugged into an amp. I have no idea what model it was, but I don't know how to use a pick, so I used my fingers. And it was super easy to play because it requires zero effort for your amplifier to pump out a lot of sound. This was in a store, I forgot what it was called. It was a store in Soho. Just for fun, I picked it up and played it. But other than that, no, I've never. There are a lot of guitarists, especially in the United States, who started out with rock and jazz on an electric guitar, and then later in teen years they switched to classical because they thought it was so much cooler. I started on classical. I've only played nylon strings, and I've held a pick in my hands just to hold it. And like when I pluck at it, it's like I'm a total beginner. I've never really touched an instrument because it's very different.
Yeah.
It's I feel like all the we call every like it's a guitar, right? But every style of guitar, it requires different kind of technique. Yes, it's the same shaped body with 6 strings on it, but it's not the same. Like I would be a terrible rock player, you know, but I do okay with my fingers on nylon strings. So
There's lots of guitar players, lots of musicians these days who are commissioning pieces, playing pieces by new composers. Have you done any of that type of work where you've commissioned a piece or played something by living
I've,
composer?
I've played pieces by new composers. Recently, I made a video of a Spanish caprice
Hmm.
translated to English by an Italian composer, Giuseppe Torrisi, and so it was a newly composed piece, and he actually dedicated it to me because I was gonna make the recording and everything. So I've played pieces by living composers, but it wasn't my commissioning.
Mm.
It was just that's just by circumstance it happened. Um, I think I should try more. It's just sometimes we forget how many other things that we do. Like literally my day is spent teaching and practicing. And or if I'm recording a CD, that's like hours of editing, recording. So to add more projects to it, it means that you will have zero life for yourself.
Mm.
And I like to keep a balance, even though, because guitar is my life. It literally has been my life for the last 3 decades plus.
Wow.
I like to do other things, like go outside, maybe hang out with friends, and have a balanced life where I'm not totally consumed by musical projects.
Yeah. Well, one thing you've been very successful at, so many things, but one thing that I've noticed that you're very good at is promoting your music on social media, and I think that's fantastic for this day and age. I listen to a lot of your recordings on YouTube as well, and I also follow your social media, and you're so great at it. Any tips for classical musicians of what's the balance you're keeping between putting personal stuff out on social media and professional stuff, but just how you manage to have such a successful kind of a career on social media as well on top of what you already do?
I think in terms of balance, I try to keep my personal life out of it. I
Mhm.
just feel like there's so many people following it that I don't even know these people, right? So, and they might be wonderful people, but I just don't know them. So my personal life it's personal, so it's not on there. And guitar wise, I'm by far not even the one that has the most followers or anything, but I find that anything I put on, it started with YouTube. um, I want anything that I put, I want to have some kind of value for the person who's watching it. So on YouTube, at first, I had just put up recordings of my repertoire pieces, and you need those because when someone wants to hire a press kit anymore, the first thing they do is Google your name or YouTube your name to see if you can play. So I had a few recordings of just me playing, but then I made some videos for the Strings by Mail channel, instructional videos, and I realized that people nowadays, especially if I for myself, right? I learned how to use an electric drill the other day. So first thing I did is I YouTubed it. That was how I learned look up anything. So and there's so much information. I figured I have something to offer. Like at least like I know how to play the guitar. Maybe I can like share some kind of information that will be helpful for people. And so anything I put up there, mostly I try to see how I can help somebody else. And then in between, there'll also be pieces just for fun for people to listen to or to show like piece that I might be playing in concert and stuff. So that's how it started. And same thing with with Instagram. It's most of the Instagram videos, they're just like really short snippets of me practicing, and they kind of have a benefit for both me and the listener. The listener is enjoying, let's say, that snippet, and for me, I'm practicing the piece, and sometimes we don't know what it actually sounds like until you record it. So I record myself and I listen back, and it's not the first take that goes up there. You know, everyone knows that. It's definitely not the first take. But you play it a few times, you listen back, and you're like, oh, I thought I was phrasing it a certain way, but I'm not. And because on the video just showed you that that's not what it sounds like. So then I get like a better take. I'm like, okay, well, it's good enough. I'll share this one. Somebody else listens to it, and for me, I learn to see what I actually sound like. And I try right now, I just haven't had much time doing like instructional things, but sometimes I use Instagram also to just offer technique tips, things that would require a very short video. Because on YouTube, it's a little bit more produced. You know, on YouTube, it's a searchable platform. So when you put something there, it's more permanent. It's like an archive of your work. So you have to put the lights up, get better quality sound. And with Instagram, because it's so passing and no one's going to see the old videos unless they go back and start stalking you on your profile. It's a very quick iPhone video that goes up. So I don't like follow any kind of rules. You know, you can read so many articles about how to grow on social media. I haven't really done that. Whenever I have time, I post. If I don't post, it's just because I've not been practicing, or I've
Yeah.
been teaching, or I've been practicing, but I didn't have time for that extra 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes to take a few takes of this, a 1 minute, 59 seconds, whatever, and
Yeah.
put it. So I don't follow a schedule that people say you should. I go with whatever I have time for, whatever is happening at that moment.
I think I've heard a previous interview with you saying that you love New York. I think you even said something along the lines of you might never move from New York. Is that true? Do I remember this correctly?
Yeah, that sounds like something I would say. Yeah, I have no
Yeah.
problem with that. Yeah.
So what is it about New York that you would not move, or is there an absolute best scenario that you might consider moving?
I don't know. It would have to be some like incredible scenario. Um, Maybe Paris if I spoke French fluently. Then maybe Paris. No, you know, I think it's also because this is my second home. So I've been here two-thirds of my life, and I grew up here on and off. I went to boarding school in northern Michigan, so that in high school I haven't been in New York. I went to Peabody, so 4 years I spent in Baltimore. But this was always home base. I always came here for vacations, summer vacation stuff. I'm from Yerevan, so that's like it's a city, and it is the biggest city in Armenia, right? So I'm used to the city life. I'm used to having everything available to me at any point. I just recently learned how to drive. Like my driver's license is 2 years old. 3 years old, 2 years old. So because I live in New York City, I don't need to drive. I don't have a car. I know I have a license, but I don't have a car. It's the lifestyle of like you walk outside, and it can be New York can be a very lonely city too, because any very big city, people are a little isolated. There's a lot of us here, but they're very isolated. We don't talk to each other. You don't look at each other. Eye contact. Mm-mm. So, but I think it's home. This has been my home since 1998 on and off. And I like that everything's here. And in terms of the location, just geographical location on this planet, I am equal distance away from Europe as I am to the west coast
Mhm.
of United States. And my mom lives in Argentina, direct flight to Buenos Aires. Location wise, it's great. You know, if I needed to travel whichever direction, I can get there. New York City, it's great for travel because the huge airports, there's flights everywhere. So in terms of like more practical reasons, it's good that I can find direct flights everywhere. But mostly it's just that culturally and everything else kind of happens here, you know, and then maybe happens somewhere else. And I like that. Even though I don't really take advantage of everything, like there's so many things to do and I don't always take advantage of it, but it's there for me to do it, you know? Like I don't have to try too hard.
Yeah, yeah. Have you been to Yerevan since you came? And are there any musical projects that you've done in Yerevan if you've been there?
I went in 2000, so I moved out, like left in 1997, and the first time I went back after that was in 2012. So that was the biggest stretch of time. And my mom went and I went back, and that time I played a concert there, and it
Yeah.
was my concert. I played on a it was at the Chamber Music Hall, and the comitas, you know, the and I played. That was the stage that I played on the very first time in my life when I was 9 on stage. That was the same stage I
Oh,
played in
wow.
coming back. And everyone in the audience, I knew them from before. These were people that knew me when I was very little. So I was like super nervous. That was the first time. So I went back with a concert. This last summer, it wasn't for a concert. I went, not this summer, but the year before, last year, I went to see my parents again. Like we kind of like met in Armenia because my dad is back in Armenia and my mom is in Argentina. So we met there. That was just like a personal trip that had nothing to do with work. I didn't take a guitar with me or anything. So those were the two times. And I went one more time for a very short amount of time in between. So I've been back 3 times. And I feel like the very first time I went back was probably the most memorable because it was after like a 15-year absence or so. And so much had changed in terms of I just thought everyone was so much shorter than I remembered, you know, because I was like 13 when I left. All my relatives were taller than me, and all of a sudden I'm taller than a lot of the relatives. And like all the places that I've been, I had remembered it at a certain size, and all of a sudden everything seemed very small because I got used to the American standards of distance, size, which is a lot bigger than the Armenian
Mhm.
standards of distance of what's considered close or far. That was more memorable because I went back to my childhood home, the yard that I used to play, and I'm like, wow, this is so tiny. And like seeing people that I left at 13 all of a sudden being adults in their 20s, that was weird. The second and third time, it was not as, not that it wasn't special, it just wasn't as crazy like of
Yeah.
a memory. But no musical projects like related to right now
Mm.
to go back to Armenia for.
What's next for
What's
you?
next? Um, Honestly, teaching, learning new repertoire. I want to, that Bach that you constantly see me put on Instagram, that poor suite is going to be beaten to my fingers soon, and I'd like to make a YouTube video of it, like a complete suite, all of the movements, to be put on YouTube. Not, I might release the audio as like a digital download, but not to like produce a CD.
Mhm.
And then from there, I just want to slowly change my repertoire. I'll of course repeat some things from the. It's impossible to change an hour repertoire all from scratch because that I know that my next concert in person, whenever that will be, it's going to be probably the most nerve-wracking concert ever because it will be the longest time that I haven't performed in front of people
Mm.
in forever, like
Yeah.
other than like when I was in high school, because we always have some kind of performance, and when doing it professionally, at least once a month there is something. Longest break is maybe 3 months, but now it's been since February. So that first concert I have to make sure that I'm over prepared for it, you know, whenever that might be, um, because otherwise you don't want to get so nervous that you can't play. So
Yeah. Go ahead. Anything else you want to add before we end?
I can't think of anything. I don't know.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Have a beautiful day.
You too.